Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Kibana Enablement for your PeopleSoft environment. My name is Katie Bolt, and I'm the Business Development Representative here at Elire. Before we get into today's presentation, I just want to cover a couple housekeeping items. All attendees have been placed on mute for the duration of the presentation. There is going to be one poll question in the presentation, and we would love your participation. We will have a Q&A at the end, so please submit any of your questions into the Q&A portal. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dayton to kick it off.
Thanks, Katie, and welcome everybody to today's session. To get us going this afternoon, we're going to go ahead and start with introductions. So I am Dayton Paul. I'm a senior consultant with Elire, focusing extensively in our treasury space, specifically within PeopleSoft implementations, and working on the Kibana and Elasticsearch end as well for all of our analytical sort of road mapping, implementations, and then user training. And today I am joined by Paul.
Hey, how are you? I'm a consultant with Elire, and I've done extensive tools and application upgrades with Elire for various clients. And I specialize a lot in the PUM deployments, DPK, and the ELK stack.
Thanks, Paul. So to start today, we're going to talk a little bit about Elire, and then we'll hop into the agenda and really get into the meat and potatoes of our session today. So Elire is celebrating over 16 years in business, and our focus is really on partnering with all of our clients to successfully optimize, deploy, and really do any strategic guidance around any of their software investments. We have a deep commitment to excellence and quality, and it truly is one of our core values to be a trusted advisor. In that vein, what we'll be talking about today and what we'll specifically be covering is truly centered around Kibana. So we'll start off with a little bit of a demonstration around the functionality and capabilities of Kibana, and then we'll get a little deeper into where Kibana actually sits within an overall PeopleSoft analytics framework. Then we'll talk about sort of your overall data management and analytics strategy, and how Kibana can really fit some of the needs within a overarching DMA strategy. We'll then talk about some of the key advantages to visualizations in general and why Kibana can be such an efficient tool for a lot of the visualizations and use cases that we ultimately want within PeopleSoft for a lot of our more advanced visualization capabilities. We'll then talk about some of the implementation hurdles, since it is a newer DPK offering from Oracle and PeopleSoft in general. So we'll talk through some of the things to look out for there. And then we'll talk about, at a high level, a lot of the delivered Kibana functionality across the board. So now that we've seen what we're going to get into for today, I'm going to go ahead and toss it over to Paul to do a demonstration here.
Sure thing. And share my screen. And today I'd like to show off the workforce composition dashboard. This is in HCM environments, and this dashboard is based on the person index that's indexed by Elasticsearch. Administrators can use this dashboard, the workforce composition dashboard in Kibana, to evaluate your employee counts within your organization. And you can go through departments, part-time status. You can see like employees by department, full-time versus part-time, regular versus temporary. So it gives a nice overview of your workforce off that index. And you can easily add different filters by simply clicking on them. So we see all of our people who are in human resources, and we see that counts 369. We can come down and click full-time versus part-time within that department. And we can easily add filters. We can easily remove filters within the Kibana dashboards. You can see our benefits team has an employee count of 93 here. And we can easily see that they're all full-time at 93. And we can see their location also, that they're all in North America. And that's just one of the core features of Kibana, is the ease of use within these dashboards and the ability to add and subtract filters quickly. Also based on the Kibana dashboards is the Health Center, which takes the log stash information. So it's part of the ELK stack. So we have Elasticsearch doing our indexes, Kibana providing the visualizations to the dashboards, and then we have Logstash, which allows us to do the Health Center analytics. So we can see the performance of our PeopleSoft environment by coming into Health Center. And we can easily take a look at our application server dashboard. So we see here's our applications, which in this setup, we only have the HR demo database connected. Here's our host being monitored. We have our web and application server, but we can go into our application server dashboard and get real-time load on our environment. So here we see our application server domain. We can come down and see the different, here's our overall health, which is okay. The current load, which is light on the environment. This is our PS home, the PeopleSoft tools version. And then we add additional information such as the architecture, which is a standard AMD 64 processor. We have 4 cores within this environment, our memory size and swap size. Then we come down, we can see real-time analytics based on those items that we just went through. We can see our free physical memory, the CPU usage over time, the request per second, request waiting. So again, it just allows you to visualize the health of your environment in a one concentric area to, when you're troubleshooting issues, it's pretty helpful. Even just kind of rolling down through some more of the objects that are being monitored through the health center. Dayton, anything else you think I should show them between the Kibana capabilities, or?
I think that is a great overview. I know when we get into questions, if there are any specific visualizations that maybe anybody might want to see, we can always talk through that within our Q&A as well.
Oh, most definitely.
So we saw at a very high level what Kibana is really capable of in terms of its visualization capabilities within our PeopleSoft environment. We saw that from an HCM perspective and from a health center perspective. And it's important to note as well that there are financial metrics available within PeopleSoft financials as well. And we'll touch on some of the key analytics that are delivered through that PeopleSoft financials Kibana implementation throughout this presentation. So we'll dive right in now into where Kibana sits within an overall PeopleSoft analytics framework. I think we're all aware that PeopleSoft offers various reporting capabilities and various tools to really allow users and organizations to do analytics in different sorts of fits and fashions. And we like to think of it as an overall hierarchy that delivers a lot of different analytical capacities for our overall PeopleSoft environments. Sort of at the base level, we like to think there's Query Manager, right? The transactional level data, the outputs, the really individual line items that make up our data sets that we're interested in from a PeopleSoft perspective. It truly is that transactional output based upon SQL on our overall database. Sort of tier 1 when we think about the overall analytics capacity. As we get a little bit more advanced, we start to incorporate some Envision reporting capabilities, especially in the use of queries as a data source within our Envision reports. We start to get a little bit more out of system. We start to get a little more automated and really do it in a fit and fashion that is a little bit more streamlined, especially from an analytics perspective. The first really, I'd say, almost groundbreaking tool in the PeopleSoft analytics space, one that really started to incorporate visualizations with transactional level data and allow for user manipulation to really explore some of the possibilities within PeopleSoft without having to hop out, make graphs or charts or use external databases, was our pivot grids. So pivot grids allow some of that baseline operational dashboard reporting, some small visualization capabilities, really nothing that you would think of in terms of overall analytics dashboard that allows a lot of manipulation and a lot of different capabilities, but it really is the foundation for what we think of next within the sort of ultimate step in our analytics journey as a whole, to really incorporate visualizations, manipulations, really end user interaction within the specific analytics we're visualizing as a whole. And that's where Kibana comes into play. Kibana starts to allow users to do a lot more exploration, a lot more drilling in, exploring maybe different metrics, maybe different targeted outputs, really start to allow overarching views of a lot of different visualizations within a single place. And we saw that through our demonstration, how there are a lot of visualizations within a single place, a lot of interaction capabilities there as well, instead of maybe just one pivot grid, one item, one query report, etc. So that's where we look at in terms of our overarching strategy. The two that really go hand in hand with each other and really have to be explored together are going to be our Kibana and then our pivot grids. So we talked a little bit about both. Kibana is really essential because it gives us a massive visualization library for a lot of delivered items, whether it be HCM, financials, or our system metrics. And it allows a lot of those metrics to be tracked through performance tracking through those dashboards and the consumption of data from across the system as a whole. So instead of specific modules, instead of specific maybe items within those modules, we're looking at it in an aggregate level as long as there's that security access there, because Kibana still is associated with all of PeopleSoft security. So there's no double setting security or anything like that. As long as somebody has access security-wise, they're able to view the data within Kibana like they would within PeopleSoft. The other really essential thing that makes Kibana different from all the other tools that we talked about, especially queries and pivot grids, is because it ports all the data over to our Elasticsearch index. There's no impact to system performance. So we're not impacting the way that the system is using memory or CPU usage or anything like that. So it really alleviates, especially when we're talking about large amounts of queries being used, the impact on system performance, which is a great enhancement to our overall analytical picture as a whole. Pivot grids, being a little different, are a little bit more contextual. They're a little bit more based on those thresholds, maybe specific notifications, and those available actions within page. We kind of think about them with the drilling dashboard, maybe the little piece on our homepage that might give us a simplified chart or overview as a whole. The thing that these do share in common that is important to call out, both these visualizations are embedded within PeopleSoft. So it's not like you're deploying a new analytical tool where somebody has to ultimately jump to a new page, use a new login, or anything like that. And we already touched on the PeopleSoft security piece, where it really does adhere to the security that's already been set up in the system, which again reduces a lot of the maintenance impact or system impact as a whole. And then just that marginal cost, really, because it is a delivered DPK from Oracle PeopleSoft. So you're not, again, going out and getting an additional license, doing additional implementations on a whole analytical tool, something that might take, a whole 2-3 years to roadmap to deploy something like a business objects or anything like that, because it really is embedded within PeopleSoft as a whole. To really talk about all the pieces and where they go and how they actually interact with PeopleSoft, it is integrated with PUM 857 and 858, where we start to see at least some Kibana system metrics being deployed in 857 with the full integration of our visualization capabilities within 858. Where those get linked up and where they come from and why they're so important is with the implementation of Elasticsearch as our search framework for PeopleSoft. It begins to index all of our data within all of our tables, which allows us to have that base data repository for all of our visualizations for anything that we want to measure. Logstash is where we get a lot of the information for our health center metrics, our system performance, and everything like that. And again, that ultimately flows through Kibana, which is that user interface that allows us to interact with all of our analytics pieces and everything as a whole. In terms of developing that overall data management and analytics strategy, there are some key steps to think about as we started to go through that hierarchy of our analytical tools. So our query manager, Envision, pivot grids, and then finally Kibana. A lot of times what we see is a lot of different tools being utilized in different capacities, especially when there's maybe some siloing going on between departments. There are certain departments who rely on a high volume queries, and there are some that rely on fewer. So really the baseline is starting to inventory, understand how everybody is ultimately utilizing all the analytics capabilities and capacities within PeopleSoft right now. Once we sort of have an idea of how every department might be using it differently, we can kind of start to align and look at the different processes for requesting new reports, see what's working well, see what maybe isn't working so well, just from an analytic perspective, from a organizational perspective when it comes to analytics. We can start to really see maybe this is the piece of our analytic requesting or sort of our flow to decide where we're developing our analytics that's working, and then we can take that into design. Design is where we push to ultimately a future state, kind of figure out what tools we want to use. We did our inventory and aligning, and we see we think we can utilize Kibana a lot to allow some visualizations to become more inherent, more flexible, and more interactive for our end users. So that's where we might move some of our pivot grid capabilities or even port over some of our transactional capabilities from our queries as a whole. So we can start to mix our visualizations and our transactional data outputs. That way they're not disjointed or unlinked or anything like that. Once we have all those pieces together, we figured out where we want to go at this point. We can begin our implementation of the specific tools we want to utilize. Maybe it's pivot grids and Kibana. Maybe it's purely just Kibana and move away from pivot grids as a whole. Try to understand ultimately where we want to go. The key things that I always look for in any analytics implementation, and especially what makes Kibana so impressive and so important in starting to incorporate in your overall analytics strategy. There are 4 key points here. The first one is our data ingestion capabilities, which I think we've talked about at a pretty high level, where Elasticsearch really does have an inherent capability to consume all of your PeopleSoft data and index it without a huge amount of system strain or anything like that. Because it's all inherently compatible within PeopleSoft, it's embedded within your environment. The maintenance requirements are incredibly minimal once you have that environment stood up for Elasticsearch and Kibana. It's not stored on an external data lake. It's not stored on an EDW with a UI on top of it or anything like that. So it's all in that single environment, which again makes those maintenance requirements incredibly low compared to a lot of other products out there. Because we have all that transactional data within a single place, it allows us to manage all of our scenarios and our diverse data sets within a single location. So we can start to do a lot of exploration without having to worry about porting over data or maybe crawling it nightly or pushing it to a new server. Again, just something that is incredibly easy to use when it comes down to it. And because of all those items, it maintains an incredibly low processing and transactional cost because we're not looking at changing ingestion capabilities, pushing for new maintenance personnel or new server requirements, and we're not having to increase costs just to manage various different scenarios. When we have all that in place, it allows us to do a lot of really cool things when it comes to our visualization capabilities as a whole. So we start to see a lot of our health center metrics push to our server optimization or even a data warehouse optimization. We can do a lot of cool things specifically around customer vendor analysis, especially when it comes to AP and AR. We start to be able to interact with that data, dynamically see aging receivables or aging payables, start to understand a lot of different things within a single location. Because that gives us a foundation that is so interactive and intuitive, it allows us to do a lot of predictive maintenance. We start to see thresholds coming up. We start to see maybe our metrics moving, and we can start to make changes before we actually cross any sort of hard threshold, which is always super important. And it helps us, again, identify trends visually, just something that is intuitively human. We learn a lot from visual capabilities. It's maybe not the easiest to always pick one line item out of an Excel spreadsheet, but if we see a bar on a bar graph that is a few inches higher than the other one, we know something is up there. With all that, it starts to lend towards fraud detection and our temporal and spatial aggregations, where we can understand things in different ways and use the material that's within our environment totally differently as well. So with that, now that we've gained an understanding, we're going to go ahead and launch into a poll question here.
Thank you, Dayton. The poll question today is going to be, where do you feel that you are in your PeopleSoft analytics strategy? And there's 4 options: still developing and understanding, refining existing capabilities, actively looking for new capabilities, or mature but open to new tools. I'll give a couple seconds to answer. It looks like votes are still rolling in, so I'll give about 5 more seconds and then close it out. Okay. So it looks like the majority of the people are still developing and understanding their analytics strategy.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for voting there. I think that is a very common place we all find ourselves in, still developing and understanding, especially when it comes to ERP data. I feel like with all these new tools running out, that really is just a place where a lot of us are at this point. And in our next section, we're going to hop into why visualizations are essential and important to really any analytics strategy, why that is a natural progression from using our transactional data to using those embedded visualization capabilities. We touched on really just the inherent piece that is truly human, where we understand visuals a lot quicker than that transactional level information. And because of that, it allows us to consume a lot more data a lot faster, just from a human side. It allows us, again, because of those dashboards in a single location, in a single place, to quickly interact and intervene when any of our metrics might be getting close to being breached, or ultimately that threshold has been passed. It allows us to also identify patterns and thresholds. So again, patterns are hard to detect in transactional levels, but when we can see a graph rising and falling, it's much easier to identify patterns. And because of the inherent interaction of visualizations, it helps us understand overall stories. So instead of maybe just a correlative piece, we can start to understand a little bit more causation within our data as a whole. We have an idea of the visualizations, we have an idea of what Kibana can do for us, and we have an idea of all the things that our analytics strategy really entails. Because Kibana is that newer offering from PeopleSoft, there are just a few implementation hurdles to look out for. And we'll touch on a few of them here, just some that we've run into through our implementation so far. A lot of it is based on storage parameters for our Java random access memories. Making sure that maintenance and those metrics are in place is essential. The difference in financials and HCM environments, I think we're all keenly aware that they are not the same environments. There are a lot of different pieces in both. And because the deployment was designed to handle both, there's some pieces within our Python configuration file that ultimately are geared more toward one environment than the other. And that's something to keep out for as well as we get into the deployment of Elasticsearch and Kibana. Because of that, there are also some known bugs within our dashboard pages, something that we have to be aware of and look out for, and make sure that we deploy our dashboard page in our Kibana instance properly, just so that we have that full capability within our deployed dashboard pages. And then just some other pieces too. The default Kibana and Kibana 2 indexes, the requesting saving access to Elasticsearch, because everything does flow back to Elasticsearch, has to be enabled as well. And then one that's not listed here, but is something that we touched on a little bit earlier, is the inherent security. So the ES admin, that Elasticsearch admin, the Kibana admin, they ultimately have to adhere to PeopleSoft security. So making sure that that is set up properly is essential to having a fully functioning Kibana and Elasticsearch environment. When you ultimately get through those implementation hurdles, you have your Kibana instance set up and ready to go. There are a lot of things to definitely look forward to, both from Elasticsearch and a Kibana perspective. Elasticsearch, because it's built on that search framework, is easy to deploy and ultimately scalable because it can handle a lot of data ingestion, like we had talked about. It indexes and stores all of our data within individual files, so it's incredibly easy to search upon, especially when you're using that Kibana interface, and it aggregates all that data within a single location. Kibana, again, is a free addition to our Elasticsearch instance, especially when it's set up through that Oracle DBK. So, and it allows us that access to near real live data in 858, and ultimately becoming live data within the next release is where that trend is heading. It allows a lot of easy automation and setup as well, which we had touched upon with all of our different visualizations that are ultimately delivered. And with all that, Oracle and PeopleSoft offers the access to all of the Kibana training library. So how to ultimately set up user dashboards, make people feel at home when it comes to a user perspective. High level, all the delivered analytics and indexes. We talked about a few of them: payables, workforce administration, our talent and recruiting, and especially our system health metrics. There are a lot of delivered indexes that we didn't touch upon. So some of the pieces that have the capability for all those visualizations, but maybe aren't the essential ones that you set up right off the bat, are HCM and talent, recruiting, benefits, compensation, payroll, payables, suppliers, GL, receivables and expenses as well. And because all that, it is incredibly easy to configure. Overall, DMA strategy, what those visualizations do for you. I think we touched on a lot of these points, but it's specifically important to reiterate. All this is incredibly easy to scale, especially for users and business objectives. It allows us to hypothesize new ideas, ultimately test them out in a visualization environment that doesn't impact our system performance and doesn't impact the data that we're actually looking at. It allows us, again, to maintain that analytical clarity without a lot of additional cost or additional needs. And it ultimately gives us the capability to monitor all of our performances, whether it is objective in a business nature or from that system performance metrics as a whole. So that covers kind of where those visualizations sit, everything that Kibana and Elasticsearch can do, especially from an analytics perspective. And I think with that, we can go ahead and open it up to any questions.
I'm not seeing any questions that have been submitted yet, Dayton, but just everyone, while we're wrapping up here, feel free to submit them. Oh, it looks like one just came through. I was unclear on the capability slide. Are you saying that Kibana can serve the same functions as Query and Vision, or whether Kibana would enhance these tools? Particularly wondering if Kibana can replace Envision.
I would say it's definitely, you'd consider it really an enhancement. I think for a clear analytics strategy, you sort of try to implement all these tools in the most refined capacity you can. Ultimately, Kibana could replace all these tools. There's the capability to have transactional information within your dashboards, but that's something to really think about and explore, especially when designing everything out. So I think it just depends a lot on sort of business processes and needs, and again, some of the system performance capabilities that we can incorporate by taking strain off of the existing PeopleSoft instance.
Thank you, Dayton. If anyone has any additional questions, you can see that Dayton and Paul's contact information are up on the screen here. So feel free to submit those to their emails if you would like. And just as a wrap up, we do have an upcoming webinar. This is going to be on PTF, happening just in about 2 weeks on May 18th. And I will drop in the chat the link to that so you guys can sign up if that's something you're interested in. And I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us again today out of your busy schedules. And we hope to talk to you guys soon. Thank you.